My name is Vivian Cross. The day my father stood at a podium in a rented event hall and called me his greatest regret, he had no idea that I was the one who had paid for the venue, not with a check he could trace, with a credit line he had opened in my name without my knowledge 2 years earlier. The bill had been $38,000 and change. My sister's celebration, my signature, my debt. I found out because of a letter, a collections notice, actually, the kind that arrives in a manila envelope with a red stripe along the top. The kind that tells you someone has been spending money you did not authorize for long enough that the creditors have given up asking nicely. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, and I stood at my kitchen counter in the city of Portland, Oregon, and looked at my own name printed above a debt I had never agreed to carry. And I felt something settle inside me that had been loose for a very long time. If you are still here, I want you to know something before I take you back to the beginning. I am not telling you this story because I am still angry. I am telling it because the audit was already filed before that podium speech was over. Because I had spent 3 years being patient in a way that looked, from the outside, like weakness. And because the moment my father looked up from the contract and found my name already on the other side, that moment was not an accident. It was the end of a very long plan. To understand what happened at that table, I need to take you back to a family that taught me, early and thoroughly, that my job was to be grateful for whatever I was given and silent about whatever was taken. I am 47 years old. I am the second of 3 children born to Leonard Cross and Diane Cross, née Morrow, in a mid-sized house in Beaverton, Oregon, where my father spent 30 years as a commercial insurance broker. And my mother spent those same 30 years reminding everyone within earshot that she had sacrificed a career in architecture to raise a family. I believe she had, in fact, completed 2 semesters of an architecture program before leaving. I know better than to have said so. My older sister is Renata Cross, now Renata Delgado, after marrying her second husband, a contractor named Felipe. And she is 4 years my senior in age, and, in my parents' estimation, approximately 400 years my senior in every other respect. Renata was the one my mother dressed carefully for family photographs. Renata was the one my father introduced by name at dinner parties. Renata had the right kind of face for the family story they wanted to tell. Warm, approachable, a little helpless in a way that made people want to help her. My younger brother is Garrett Cross, 39 years old, who has spent the better part of the last decade in a state of low-grade financial emergency that my parents have consistently treated as a temporary situation rather than a permanent personality trait. I was the quiet one, the capable one, which in my family was not a compliment. My parents spoke about my competence the way people speak about a tool they appreciate, but do not particularly like, useful in specific circumstances, not the kind of thing you display in the living room. I left for college at 18, came back for holidays, and spent the years between my mid-20s and my late 30s building something my family did not know existed. I passed the bar exam on my first attempt. I spent 6 years at a firm in Portland handling estate and trust work, learning the architecture of how families pass money between generations, and watching, with a professional clarity that was sometimes uncomfortable, the ways those structures could be manipulated. I left that firm in the spring of 2017 and opened my own practice, Cross Estate and Trust, LLC, operating out of a 3-room suite on the 4th floor of a building on Southwest Morrison Street. My family knew I was a lawyer. They knew it the way you know something you have decided not to find interesting. My mother would tell people I worked in contracts, the way you might describe a surgeon as someone who works with knives. My father, on the occasions when the subject came up, would nod and change the subject to Renata's interior design business or Garrett's latest venture, which in those years involved a food truck that never quite launched. I did not correct them. I was building a client list. I was building a reputation. And this matters. I want you to understand this. I was watching. The first time I remember understanding clearly that I was operating under a different set of rules than my siblings, I was 26 years old. My grandmother, my father's mother, Eunice Cross, had passed away in January of that year, leaving a modest estate, a house in Beaverton, a savings account holding approximately $42,000, and a collection of jewelry that my mother had been eyeing for the better part of a decade. My grandmother's will, which I later reviewed professionally when my own work brought me into contact with the family attorney's records, had divided the estate equally among her 3 grandchildren. What I received was a pair of earrings and a card that said my grandmother had wanted me to have them specifically. The card was in my mother's handwriting. The savings account and the proceeds from the house sale, somewhere in the range of $260,000 total after fees, were distributed among Renata and Garrett, with a note in the family's informal accounting that I had been settled separately through the jewelry bequest. I was 26. I did not yet have the professional vocabulary to articulate what had been done, but I knew. I knew because my grandmother had spoken to me 3 months before she died about wanting to make sure all 3 of her grandchildren were treated equally. She had said the word equally with the particular emphasis of someone who has reason to believe it needs emphasizing. I did not say anything at the time. I filed it away, the way you file things you are not yet equipped to act on, and I went back to Portland and worked harder. The second incident was less subtle. In the summer of 2019, my parents decided to refinance the family home, a house that I had discovered during a routine title search I ran out of professional habit, had been appraised at $840,000, substantially more than anyone in the family had ever publicly acknowledged. My father called me that August and told me, with the tone of someone conferring a great honor, that he needed me to co-sign the refinance paperwork because his debt-to-income ratio was creating complications with the lender. He framed this as a favor I would be doing for the family. He did not mention that co-signing the mortgage would make me jointly liable for a debt on a property I had no legal interest in. He did not mention that the refinance was pulling out $120,000 in equity, money that was subsequently used to fund Renata's kitchen renovation and Garrett's third attempt at a business venture. I co-signed. I am not proud of that. I did it because I was still, at that point, operating under the assumption that family loyalty had some value I had not yet found a way to measure. I co-signed, and I drove home, and I sat in my car outside my building for 11 minutes. I remember the time because I was supposed to be on a call at 6, and I was watching the clock. And I thought about what it meant that my father had not asked Renata to co-sign, had not asked Garrett. He had asked me because he knew I would do it. And he knew I would do it because he had correctly identified over the course of 26 years that I was the one who would absorb what the others would not. That was the last time I absorbed something without documenting it. That evening, after the call I was late for and the dinner I did not eat, I pulled up the refinance paperwork I had kept a copy of, and I started a file. Not an emotional file, not a list of grievances, a legal file. Dates, dollar amounts, the names of the parties involved, the nature of my financial exposure. I am an estate and trust attorney. I know what documentation is worth. I began from that night forward to treat my family the way I would treat a client situation that had the potential to become adversarial. I did not tell anyone I was doing this. I kept going to Christmas dinners and birthday parties. I kept receiving my mother's calls, which were usually requests disguised as check-ins. I smiled at Renata's renovation photographs and sent congratulatory texts when Garrett announced, for the 4th time, that he was relaunching his business concept. I was present, I was warm, and I was building a file that, by the time the collections notice arrived in October of 2022, was 117 pages long. The estate attorney my father used for his business, a woman named Gloria Fenn, who operated a solo practice on the 4th floor of the building on Southwest Morrison Street, was in my building, on my floor, 3 doors down from my suite. She had been referred to my father's largest commercial client by me 18 months earlier, after that client had mentioned needing a transition attorney for a business succession matter. Gloria was excellent at her work and had no idea that the family whose estate documents she was preparing included the woman who had quietly sent her the most valuable client in her current portfolio. I want you to hold that detail. It becomes important. The thing about living inside a family that underestimates you is that you get very comfortable with the distance between what they think they know and what is actually true. I had been practicing in that distance for years. I had learned to let the silence sit, to let the assumption stand, to let my mother tell her friends that I was in contracts, while I was simultaneously handling 7 active estate matters and building a client network that included two of the largest family-owned businesses in the Pacific Northwest. My mother once told me at a Sunday dinner in the spring of 2020 that my problem was that I had never learned to let people help me, that I had always been too independent, too closed off, too unwilling to accept what the family was trying to give me. She said this with her hands folded on the table and her voice carrying the particular softness she used when she wanted something to land as wisdom rather than criticism. I looked at her across the dinner table and I thought about the co-signed mortgage. I thought about the earrings. I thought about the file on my laptop at home, now 60 pages long and growing. "You're probably right," I said. "I should work on that." She looked satisfied. That was the right answer. That was the answer that kept the dinner moving and the atmosphere warm and the appearance of family cohesion intact. I went home that evening and added the conversation to the file. The collections notice arrived on a Tuesday in October of 2022. I stood at my kitchen counter and looked at my name above an account I did not recognize, a balance of $38,420, and a note that the account had been opened in April of 2021, 18 months earlier. April of 2021 was the month of Renata's 40th birthday party. I want to describe for you what it feels like to understand something you already suspected, but had not yet confirmed. It is not shock. Shock involves surprise. What I felt was more like the physical sensation of a piece clicking into place, a small, final sound inside your chest, the kind that means the structure is now complete. I put the envelope down on the counter. I went to my office. I pulled up my credit report. There were 3 accounts I did not recognize: the event venue credit line, a catering company charge card, a floral supplier account, all opened in a 12-month window between March of 2021 and February of 2022. Total exposure, $47,200, all in my name, all for charges that, when I traced the vendors, connected directly to Renata's birthday celebration and the 2 smaller family events that followed it. My mother had organized all 3 events. I knew this because she had called me during the planning period for Renata's party to ask my opinion on venues, a conversation I had taken at the time as an unusual gesture of inclusion. I now understood the real purpose of the call. She had needed information. Specifically, she had needed my date of birth, confirmed because she had already used my social security number, obtained, I later determined, from the co-signed mortgage paperwork, and she needed the birthday to complete the application. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, not because I was devastated. I want to be clear about this. By October of 2022, I had been watching my family's financial behavior carefully for 3 years. I had suspected something like this was possible. What I felt, sitting at my desk, was not grief or betrayal in the acute sense. It was the particular clarity that comes when you have been right about something you hoped you were wrong about, and the time for hoping is over. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. not my estate attorney, my personal attorney, a woman named Theodora Nakamura, who practiced consumer and civil litigation out of an office in the Pearl District, and who I had been paying a monthly retainer for the past 14 months. I had retained her in September of 2021, 2 months after the first credit account was opened in my name, because I had noticed something irregular in my credit monitoring and wanted to be prepared. "The accounts are confirmed," I told her when she answered. A brief pause. All three, plus a fourth I hadn't caught yet. Floral supplier. Timeline, March 2021 through February 2022. My mother organized all 4 events. The Social Security number came from the mortgage cosign in 2019. Theodora made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite satisfaction. "Identity theft is a federal matter," she said, "but we can also file civil." "I know," I leaned back in my chair. "I don't want to file yet. I want to see how far they go." Another pause. "Vivian, I have time," I said, "and I want the complete picture before I move." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You need to freeze your credit tonight, already done, and document the discovery." "I'm doing it now." I heard her chair shift on the other end of the line. "I'll prepare the civil complaint. When you're ready, we file. And Vivian, when you do decide to move on this, I want you to let me run the pace." "That's why I pay you," I said. I hung up and went back to my notes. In the column I kept for what I knew, I added 4 lines. In the column I kept for what I was waiting for, I left space. The thing about identity theft inside a family is that it requires a particular kind of arrogance to execute. Not the arrogance of someone who believes they will not get caught. The arrogance of someone who believes, even if they are caught, that the relationship will absorb it. My mother had spent 47 years teaching me that family loyalty meant absorbing things. She had learned from my behavior that the lesson had taken. She was not wrong about the lesson. She was wrong about the conclusion she had drawn from it. In November of 2022, 5 weeks after the collections notice, I attended Thanksgiving at my parents' house in Beaverton, the house on which I was still a cosigner, the house that had, since the refinance, appreciated in value to somewhere north of $950,000. According to the county assessor's website, I checked from the driveway before I went inside. Garrett was there with his girlfriend, a quiet woman named Priya Suresh, who worked as a physical therapist and had the particular expression of someone who has been attending a family's holidays long enough to stop being surprised by what happens at them. Renata was there with Felipe, who spent most of the evening in the kitchen where it was warm, and the conversation was about food rather than real estate. My father was in the living room, in the chair he always occupied, and he looked comfortable in the way that men of a certain age and a certain level of unexamined privilege tend to look comfortable, settled into their surroundings, not anticipating disruption. My mother moved through the kitchen and the dining room with the efficiency she always brought to family events. She had set the table with the good dishes. She had arranged the centerpiece herself, 3 seasonal floral arrangements that I recognized with a specific and cold precision as matching the style of the vendor whose account was now sitting in collections under my name. I helped with the sweet potatoes. I set out the water glasses. I had the same conversation with Garrett about his new business concept, this time an app-based delivery service for specialty groceries that I had been having in various forms for the better part of a decade. At dinner, my father raised a glass and made a toast about family and gratitude, and I looked at his face across the table and thought about the audit request I had asked Theodora to prepare, but not yet file. I thought about the credit accounts. I thought about Gloria Fenn, 3 doors down from my office, who was currently preparing the trust documents for my father's estate succession plan, and who had, at a brief hallway conversation 2 weeks earlier, mentioned to me that the trust was structured in a way she was not entirely comfortable with. She had not elaborated. She had mentioned it with the careful vagueness of someone who has an ethical concern and is not yet sure what to do with it. I had listened, and I had not asked her to tell me more because I did not need her to. I had the co-signed mortgage documents. I had the collections notices. I had 3 years of documented financial irregularities, and I had, in a secure folder on an encrypted drive, copies of my parents' estate planning documents, not obtained improperly, but through a chain of professional contact that was entirely legitimate, which showed, among other things, that the trust my father had structured for the distribution of the family estate had been revised in the summer of 2021 to reduce my share from 1/3 to 8%. 8% of an estate that, between the house, the investment accounts, and the commercial insurance business my father was in the early stages of selling, was currently valued at somewhere between $1.2 and $1.4 million. They had revised my share downward to 8% in the same summer. They opened the first credit account in my name. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to understand what that means about how clearly they had thought through what they were doing and how certain they were that I would never find out. My father finished his toast. I raised my glass with everyone else. Garrett's girlfriend Priya caught my eye across the table for just a moment, and I saw something in her expression, a flicker of something careful and knowing. And then she looked away. After dinner, while my mother was making coffee and my father and Felipe were discussing a home improvement project, Renata found me in the hallway near the coat closet and asked me, in the tone she used for things she wanted to seem casual, whether I was doing all right financially. I looked at her. "I'm fine," I said. "It's just," she adjusted the strap of her bracelet, the particular silver and enamel bracelet my grandmother had given her, the one that had been meant, according to the original estate distribution, to go to me. "Mom mentioned you'd had some issues with some accounts." My mother had told her. Of course she had. They had opened accounts in my name, run up nearly $50,000 in charges, defaulted on the payments, and then told Renata I had had some issues with some accounts. The reframing was breathtaking in its completeness. "Nothing I can't manage," I said. Renata nodded, with the expression of someone who has received the answer they were looking for. She was not asking because she was concerned. She was asking because she wanted to know whether I knew. I had told her the truth. She had received it as confirmation of what she hoped, that I did not know the full shape of what had been done, or that I knew and was going to absorb it the way I always had. I went home that evening and sent Theodora a message. Add the 2019 mortgage cosign documentation to the civil file. Her response came 40 minutes later. Already in. Also, have you looked at the trust revision date against the account opening dates? I had. I had the comparison ready. The trust had been revised on July 8th of 2021. The first fraudulent account had been opened on March 15th of 2021. 4 months earlier, they had opened the accounts before they revised the trust. They had already decided, before the fraudulent borrowing began, that my share of the estate would be reduced to the point of irrelevance. The credit accounts were not an impulsive act. They were part of a sequence. The sequence had a logic, and the logic meant that what had happened to me was not a mistake or a lapse. It was a strategy. I see it, I messaged back. We're not filing yet. I want the estate sale paperwork first. The business sale. My father is in the process of selling his brokerage. When that transaction closes, I want to know the final number before we move. You think there's more? I think, I typed slowly, that when someone revises a trust to reduce one child's share to 8% in the same quarter they open fraudulent credit accounts in that child's name, they are probably not finished. There was a pause before her reply. Then, okay, we wait. The business sale closed in February of 2023. I knew about it because Garrett called me, unable to contain himself, to announce that their father had sold the Cross Insurance Group to a regional brokerage firm for an amount that, in Garrett's telling, was pretty significant. He was trying to sound casual. He was not good at it. I already knew the amount. I had known it for 3 weeks. From a source I am not going to name here, but which I will say involved the professional network I had spent 6 years building in the Portland commercial real estate and business transaction community. The Cross Insurance Group had sold for $1,840,000. After fees and taxes, the distributable estate was going to be somewhere in the range of $1.4 million, plus the house, which had finally been appraised at $980,000. My 8% share of the estate would yield approximately $180,000 from the liquid assets, plus whatever calculation they applied to the property, what they had stolen from me through the fraudulent credit accounts and the trust revision and the 20-year pattern of diverting resources away from my legitimate share of the family's financial life amounted to substantially more than that. I had 2 conversations in the week after I confirmed the sale price. The first was with Theodora. We went through the civil complaint she had prepared, which now ran to 11 pages and cited identity theft under the Identity Theft Enforcement and Restitution Act, fraud, and unjust enrichment. We discussed the trust challenge, which would be filed separately, and which had a reasonable legal basis given the documented timing of the revisions and the concurrent fraudulent activity. The second conversation was with Gloria Fenn. I knocked on her office door on a Thursday afternoon in late February and asked if she had a few minutes. She did. I sat down across from her, and I said, carefully and professionally, that I had become aware of some irregularities in the Cross family estate that I thought she should know about before she finalized the trust distribution documents. Gloria Fenn looked at me with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation to happen and is relieved that it is finally occurring. I had concerns, she said. Her voice was even. When the trust was revised, the beneficiary reduction for the second heir struck me as atypical, given the family structure. It was revised in coordination with a fraudulent credit scheme, I told her. I have documentation. I am filing a civil complaint and a trust challenge. I wanted you to know before the filing so you are not in an uncomfortable position. Gloria straightened her posture in her chair. Am I a witness? Potentially. As the drafting attorney, you would be asked about the circumstances of the revision. She looked at her desk. Then she looked back at me. I want you to know that I expressed reservations to your father at the time of the revision. He told me the change reflected a mutual family agreement. It did not. I see that now. I stood up. I appreciate you telling me. I moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. The estate sale. My father will be expecting you to file the distribution documents within the next 60 days. That's the timeline, yes. Before you do, I said, you should know that the audit request has already been filed with the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services. Any distribution that occurs after the filing is made part of the record. Gloria Fenn turned in her chair to look at me fully. When was it filed? 2 weeks ago, I said, before the sale closed. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, your father doesn't know. He will, I said. At the family meeting, they've asked me to attend next month. I left her office and walked the 12 feet down the hallway to my own suite. I sat at my desk. Outside, the city was gray and damp, with the specific gray dampness of a Portland February. And I could hear the street noise from 4 floors down. And I thought about a Sunday dinner in 2020, where my mother had told me I had never learned to let people help me. I had let people help me. I had let Theodora help me build a civil case that was now 11 pages and growing. I had let Gloria Fenn's professional discomfort help me establish a witness. I had let my father's own estate planning timeline set the clock for the confrontation. I had been helped, in fact, by everyone who needed to be part of the resolution. I had just been quiet about it. In March of 2023, Garrett called again. This time the tone was different, tighter, less casual. He said that Mom and Dad wanted to have a family meeting, that there were things to discuss about the estate distribution, that everyone should be there. He said, "You'll come, right?" I said, "Of course." He sounded relieved. The relief bothered me more than hostility would have. Hostility would have meant he understood what he was a part of. Relief meant he thought I was still the person who would sit at the table and absorb whatever was placed in front of me. "It'll be at the house," he said. "Saturday the 18th. Dad wants to have Gloria there to go through the documents. Gloria would be there." My parents had invited Gloria to be present for the estate document review, which meant they trusted her completely, which meant they did not know about our conversation in February. "I'll be there," I said. After I hung up, I called Theodora. I told her the date. "I'll have the complaint ready to serve," she said. "I don't want it served at the house," I said. "I want it filed before the meeting, on record, but I want to hand them the filing summary myself." A pause. "That's unusual, I know. It's also," she said slowly, "not the worst instinct I've ever heard from a client. I want them to understand what they're looking at before they say a word in front of Gloria. I want the conversation to happen with full information on the table. And if they deny everything, they can't," I said, "because of the estate attorney. Gloria has the original documents. She knows the revision timeline. She is going to be in that room, and the audit filing is already on record with the state." Another pause. Then Theodora said something I had not expected from a litigation attorney. "Vivian," she said, "how long have you been planning this specific sequence?" I thought about the collections notice in October of 2022. I thought about the file I had started building in the fall of 2019. I thought about sitting in my car outside my building, watching the clock and thinking about what it meant that my father had come to me. "A while," I said. "I want you to know," she said, "that in 14 years of practice, I have had exactly 2 clients who did what you did, who documented everything in real time, retained counsel before they had proof, and waited for the complete picture before filing. Both of those cases resolved in the client's favor." I did not say anything for a moment. "Both of them?" I said. "Both," she said. "Some sleep before the 18th. I put the phone down. Outside my window, the city was moving through its Friday evening. Somewhere across town, my parents were in the house on the co-signed mortgage, in the rooms where Renata's birthday parties had been celebrated with flowers charged to my name, with a trust document in their files that had been revised to give me 8% of what was mine. They had 20 days. They had spent 23 years building the version of our family that made them comfortable. I had spent 3 years building the version that was accurate. The audit was already filed. Gloria Fenn was already aware. Theodora Nakamura was already preparing the service documents, and I had a copy of a signed contract, a venue rental agreement from April of 2021, with my signature on the other side. The thing about a forged signature is that it does not disappear when the person who forged it looks away. It stays in the record. It stays in the file. It stays in the audit. I had been their quiet disappointment for 23 years. I had been the one they did not worry about because I had never made them worry. I had been the one they had borrowed against because they were certain I would not push back. They were not entirely wrong about who I had been. They were entirely wrong about who I had become. The 18th was a Saturday. The house in Beaverton would smell like the coffee my mother always made for family meetings, the particular dark roast she used when she wanted things to feel serious and considered. My father would be in his chair. Renata would have driven up from her house in Lake Oswego, 40 minutes south. Garrett would arrive late, because Garrett always arrived late. Gloria Fenn would be there with her briefcase and her carefully neutral expression, and the full knowledge of what I had told her in February. And I would walk in with a folder. Not a dramatic folder, not a legal pad with highlighted documents, just a plain manila folder, the kind I used for every client meeting, the kind that said this is professional and considered and not a performance. Inside it, the civil complaint Theodora had filed, the audit confirmation from the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services, a one-page summary of the fraudulent accounts with dates and amounts listed clearly, and a copy of the trust document, the revised version, with the date of revision highlighted in yellow. Alongside the date, the first account had been opened in my name. I had not yet decided, as of that Friday evening, exactly what I was going to say when I walked in and set the folder on the table. But I had decided this. I was going to be the last person to speak, and whatever my father said at that podium about his greatest regret, whatever my mother said about family and loyalty and the decisions that had to be made, I was going to let them finish. I was going to let them be fully committed to their version of the story before I put the folder on the table. Because the thing about a strategy is that it requires your opponent to have completely overextended before you show your position. They had been overextending for 3 years. They had forged my name, restructured my inheritance, borrowed against my credit, and invited me to a family meeting to discuss the estate distribution, apparently without considering the possibility that I had been watching every step of the process. They had built their plan on the assumption that I would continue to be who I had been at 26, standing in the family living room, holding a pair of earrings that had been substituted for my grandmother's actual bequest. I was not that person anymore. I was not sure I had ever been entirely that person. I had just been waiting for the moment when showing them the difference would matter most. Saturday was coming. I had a folder. I had an attorney. I had a co-signed mortgage, a documented identity theft, a trust challenge, and an audit on file with the state of Oregon. My father would be in his chair, and when he opened the contract and looked across the table and found my name already on the other side, not as a victim, not as a silent beneficiary accepting 8% of what was hers, but as the attorney who had been building this case while he was giving speeches about his greatest regret, I wanted to see his face when he understood that the quiet one had been the sharpest person in the room the entire time. I poured a glass of water. I looked at my notes one more time. I thought briefly about Priya Suresh, Garrett's girlfriend, who had caught my eye across the Thanksgiving table with that careful, knowing expression. And I made a note to make sure she was not in the room when the filing was presented. She had not been part of this. She did not deserve to be in the room when the walls came down. I thought about Renata and the bracelet and the 40 years she had spent being the family's chosen story. I felt, for a moment, something that was not quite pity and not quite sympathy, but occupied the same general territory. She had been used as a reason for what was done to me. That did not make her innocent, but it meant the story was more complicated than a villain and a victim. I thought about my father at the podium, calling me his greatest regret, and I thought about the venue credit line sitting in collections under my name, and the moment when that particular memory did not produce pain anymore. It produced a kind of professional focus. I had paid for that room. I had paid for the speech. I had been paying, in one form or another, for the version of the family that excluded me for as long as I could remember. On Saturday the 18th, I was going to stop. And when the meeting was over and the documents were on the table, and Gloria Fenn had confirmed what she had confirmed, and my father had looked at the audit filing number on the cover page and understood what it meant, I was not going to say anything about regret. I was not going to say anything about the years or the earrings or the quiet Sunday dinners where I had smiled and added notes to my file on the drive home. I was going to set the folder on the table. I was going to take my seat. And I was going to say, in the same calm voice I used with every client who had ever sat across from me and realized the structure they had built was not the structure they thought it was. I've reviewed everything. Let's talk about what happens next. The week before the 18th, Garrett called me again. This was unusual. Garrett did not typically call twice in the same month unless something had shifted in the family's calculation, and I had learned, over the years, to treat his calls as weather reports. They told me what direction the wind was coming from, even when he did not know he was reporting it. He said he wanted to get coffee, just the two of us, before the Saturday meeting. He said he thought it would be good to talk. We met at a place in Northwest Portland on a Wednesday morning, a coffee shop on Thurman Street that neither of us had any particular connection to, which I suspected was deliberate on his part. Neutral ground, no associations. He arrived 8 minutes late, which was early for Garrett, and he ordered something complicated that the barista had to repeat back to him twice. He sat across from me with his hands wrapped around his cup, and he looked, for a moment, like the younger brother I had driven to soccer practice when he was 11, and I was 15, uncertain, and a little young for whatever the situation was asking of him. I want you to know, he said, that the meeting on Saturday is it's administrative. It's not meant to be anything heavy. I waited. Dad's going to go through the distribution structure. Gloria will have the documents. He pulled at the cardboard sleeve on his cup once. Then he smoothed it back down. The numbers are what they are. I just want you to be prepared that your portion is. It reflects some decisions that were made. What decisions? I asked. My voice was even, the kind of even that requires practice. He looked at the table. There were costs. Over the years, things the family absorbed that, you know how it is. Renata's situation and the events. And there are some expenses that got attributed to different accounts. He was telling me, in the most carefully vague language he could construct, that the family intended to present the fraudulent credit charges as legitimate family expenses that would be used to justify reducing my distribution. They were going to make the theft the argument for the theft. I felt something that was not anger. It was closer to a kind of professional admiration for the sheer architectural audacity of it. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. He looked up. "I just don't want it to be a whole thing." "It won't be a whole thing," I said. And that was the truth, though not in the way he meant it. He seemed relieved. He pulled at the cardboard sleeve again, this time all the way off, and set it on the table beside his cup. "You've always been, you handle things well," he said. "I mean that. You've always been the most solid one of us." I looked at him. I thought about the trust revision. I thought about 8% of $1.4 million. I thought about what it meant that my brother's version of a compliment was describing me as the load-bearing wall of a house he had never helped build. "Thanks, Garrett," I said. He drove away afterward, and I sat in my car for 4 minutes on Thurman Street. And I thought about Priya Suresh, his girlfriend, and the way she had caught my eye at Thanksgiving with that careful expression. I wondered if she knew. I decided, on balance, that she had probably seen enough to have suspicions, but not enough to have facts. I hoped, for her sake, that she had the good sense to be somewhere else on Saturday. Then I drove to my office, sat down at my desk, called Theodora, and told her about the conversation. "They're going to present the fraudulent charges as attributed costs," I said. "They're building a justification for the reduced distribution." Theodora was quiet for a moment. "That's fraud compounded on fraud. I know. And they're going to do it in front of Gloria." "Yes," another pause. "Vivian, Gloria has the drafting records. She knows when the trust was revised. If they present fabricated expense attributions as the basis for the distribution in front of the drafting attorney, she will be in an untenable professional position," I said. "Yes." "Have you spoken to her about Saturday?" "Not yet. You should." "I'm going to," I said, "but not today. I want her to walk in on Saturday, having prepared the documents the way my father asked her to prepare them. I want her to be in the room when he explains the attributed costs. I want her to hear it in the moment." Theodora made a sound that, from an attorney of 14 years' practice, was the closest thing to approval she ever expressed. "You're setting the scene. I'm letting them set it themselves." That was the moment I stopped waiting. I started building. The discovery that changed the entire structural calculus of what I was planning came from a file I had requested 3 months earlier and nearly forgotten about. In November of 2022, a week after the collections notice arrived, I had submitted a formal public records request to the Washington County Assessor's Office regarding any property transactions associated with the family address in Beaverton. I had done it systematically, the way I did most things in this period, not because I had a specific expectation, but because I had learned that thoroughness in the gathering phase meant fewer surprises in the confrontation phase. I had submitted the request, received an acknowledgement, and set a reminder to follow up. The file arrived by secure document transfer on a Monday morning in early March of 2023, 11 days before the family meeting. I opened it at my desk, with my coffee still steaming beside me. and the particular focused quiet of an early Monday before the phone started. The file contained the full recorded transaction history for the Beaverton property going back to its original purchase in 1988. I scanned forward to the recent entries. There was the original mortgage. There was the refinance in 2019. My co-signature visible on page 4 of the instrument, right where I had known it would be. There were the routine county assessment records, the property tax history, the standard paperwork of a house that had been owned by the same family for 35 years. And then there was a deed transfer recorded in August of 2022. I set my coffee down. The deed recorded on August 17th of 2022, 7 weeks before the collections notice arrived, 14 months after the first fraudulent credit account had been opened in my name, transferred a 14% undivided interest in the Beaverton property to Renata Cross Delgado. My father had given Renata a 14% stake in the house. The house on which I was still a cosigner for the mortgage. The house I had no ownership interest in, had never had any ownership interest in, and had been used as a source of refinanced equity to fund a kitchen renovation for the sibling who now held a legal property interest in it. The interest had been conveyed by quitclaim deed, signed by my father and notarized by a notary public in Beaverton named Douglas Reeve. No consideration listed. A gift conveyance. I sat with that for approximately 90 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called an attorney I had not yet needed to contact in this matter. His name was Soren Vidal, and he was a real property and title law specialist who operated a boutique practice in downtown Portland that I had referred several estate clients to over the previous 4 years. Soren was 44 years old, meticulous in the way that title attorneys have to be, and he had the particular quality I most valued in a professional ally. He read documents before he formed opinions. I need a title analysis, I told him when he answered. Family property, co-signed mortgage, subsequent quitclaim transfer to a third party, no consideration. Conflict concern, he asked immediately. He knew I worked in the same professional community. The property owner is my father, I said. The co-signer is me. The transferee is my sister. A pause. You're on the mortgage. I am. Was the transfer disclosed to the lender? I had already checked. No notice of transfer on record with the lender. Soren's voice shifted into the particular register he used when something had his full attention. Send me everything. Mortgage instrument, the refinance documents, the quitclaim deed. I'll have a preliminary analysis for you by Wednesday. I sent the documents within the hour. Then I went back to the public records file and looked at the August deed transfer one more time. My father had transferred a 14% stake in the property to Renata without notifying the lender, without notifying me, the cosigner, without the cosigner's consent, which the mortgage instrument, I pulled it up and confirmed, required for any partial transfer of ownership interest in the secured property. He had done it in August of 2022, 7 weeks before the collections notice arrived. 5 months after the last fraudulent credit account had been opened in my name. The sequence was now complete. They had used my credit to fund the family's events. They had revised the trust to reduce my inheritance. And they had transferred a property interest to Renata in a transaction that, under the terms of the mortgage I was co-signed on, required my consent and had not received it. 3 separate legal exposures. 3 separate tracks, all running simultaneously. I looked at the ceiling of my office for a moment. Then I looked back at my desk. I called Theodora. "There's a deed transfer," I told her. August of 2022. 14% interest, father to sister, quitclaim, no consideration, no lender notice, no cosigner consent. Silence. Then, the mortgage instrument requires cosigner consent for ownership transfers. Page 7, paragraph 4 of the refinance agreement. Vivian. Her voice had the quality of an attorney who has just watched a case triple in value. That's a breach of the mortgage instrument. The lender has a claim, and as cosigner, I have standing to raise it, I said. Yes, this changes the estate distribution picture substantially. If the property transfer is challenged and unwound, the estate asset value changes. The distribution percentages recalculate. And Renata's 14% interest, I said, becomes a contested asset in the trust challenge. Theodora was quiet for 3 full seconds. That was a long time for her. Where did you find the deed? Public records request. November of last year. You filed it in November. Yes. And you're just reading the response now. The response came Monday morning, I said. I'm calling you Monday morning. A short sound, not quite a laugh, not quite something else. The family meeting is the 18th. 11 days, I said. I need Soren's title analysis and your updated complaint before then. Can we have a joint call Thursday? Thursday at 2, she said. I'll have the complaint updated by Wednesday end of day. I hung up and went back to the public records file. I looked at the quitclaim deed one more time. Douglas Reeves' notary stamp, my father's signature. The date in August, when none of this had yet surfaced, when the family's entire plan was still proceeding on the assumption that I did not know and would not find out. The deed had been recorded. It was public record. It had been sitting in a county database for 7 months, waiting for someone to request it. My ally had been bureaucracy, the kind that keeps records because it has always kept records, indifferent to who benefits from the keeping. I made a note in the file. Then I added a new tab to the spreadsheet I had been maintaining since October, labeled it Property Deed Transfer, and began entering the relevant data. Mini payoff 3 in my private accounting of this situation was not dramatic. It was a deed transfer form in a county database and a co-signed mortgage instrument from 2019. But it was the piece that connected the credit fraud to the trust manipulation to the property transfer into one coherent, documented picture of a family that had been systematically redirecting my financial standing to benefit my siblings for years. They had a serious problem, and they did not know it yet. Soren Vittle's title analysis arrived Wednesday evening, as promised, and I reviewed it at my kitchen table with dinner going cold beside me. It was 14 pages and precise, in the way his work always was. Citations to the relevant mortgage instrument clauses, a review of Oregon property law regarding cosigner rights, and a section at the end labeled preliminary conclusions that contained 3 bullet points I had already expected and one I had not. The one I had not expected was this: the quitclaim deed, as recorded, contained a description error in the legal property description. The lot dimensions cited in the deed instrument did not match the current county plat map for the Beaverton address. The discrepancy was minor, a boundary line notation from an older survey, not the current one. But under Oregon recording statutes, a deed with a materially inaccurate legal description was voidable on that basis alone, independent of the lender notification issue. The deed was voidable on 2 separate grounds. I called Soren the following morning before the Thursday 2 o'clock with Theodora. "The description error," I said. "How did that happen?" "My best guess. Whoever prepared the deed used the original 1988 legal description from the purchase documents rather than the current surveyed description. The lot line was adjusted in a minor boundary agreement in 2004. The description in county records was updated. Whoever drafted the quitclaim either didn't check or didn't know to check. Can you determine who prepared it?" A brief pause. "The deed doesn't identify the preparer, just the notary. But the notary is in Beaverton, not Portland. It looks like a do-it-yourself preparation. The formatting isn't a law firm document. My father had prepared the deed himself, or had paid someone to do it cheaply without running it through an attorney, which meant Gloria Fenn had not drafted it, which meant he had deliberately kept it off the professional record, outside the estate planning documents Gloria was managing. He had hidden the property transfer from his own estate attorney. That detail went into the file under its own heading. The Thursday call with Theodora and Soren lasted 1 hour and 23 minutes. By the end of it, I had 3 active legal tracks: the civil identity theft and fraud complaint, the trust challenge, and the property deed challenge. Soren would file a title action if needed. Theodora would handle the civil and trust matters. The audit with the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services was already on record. "The question," Theodora said, toward the end of the call, "is sequencing. What do you want them to know, and when?" "I want them to know everything at the meeting," I said, "but I want to control the order. Walk me through it. They'll open with the estate distribution. My father will present the trust document, and Gloria will have the distribution calculations. They'll present the attributed costs, the fraudulent charges framed as family expenses, as the basis for my reduced share. Gloria will be present and will be hearing this framing for the first time. At which point," Theodora said, "she will be professionally aware that the justification doesn't match the documented trust revision timeline." "Yes. Then I present the civil complaint filing, the audit confirmation, the identity theft documentation." I paused. "Then Soren's title analysis." "You save the deed for last," Soren said. He had been quiet for most of the call. "Why?" "Because it's the piece they don't know I have. The fraud complaint, They might have considered the possibility that I had found the accounts. The trust challenge, they may have anticipated that. But the deed transfer was private. They prepared it themselves without professional help. They recorded it quietly. They had no reason to think I knew about it. The surprise asset, Soren said. The one they think is hidden, I said. Yes. A moment of quiet on the call. Then Theodora. What do you want as an outcome? I had thought about this carefully. I want to be honest about the fact that there was a version of this situation where I could have wanted only money. Full distribution restoration. Restitution for the fraudulent charges, legal fees. Those were legitimate outcomes, and I was going to pursue all of them. But that was not the only thing. I want my father to sign the audit, I said, personally, in front of Gloria. I want him to acknowledge, in writing and in witness, that the attributed expenses are fraudulent, and that the trust revision was made without legitimate basis. Soren made a sound of professional appreciation. A signed acknowledgement in front of the drafting attorney becomes evidence in every subsequent proceeding. It becomes the foundation, I said, for whatever comes after. And if he refuses to sign, Theodora asked, then we file immediately and let the courts produce the same result with considerably more cost and visibility. Another pause. He'll sign, Theodora said, when he sees all 3 tracks laid out in front of his estate attorney. He'll sign. I hoped she was right. I thought she was right. But I had stopped making assumptions about what my family would do when cornered. I had simply prepared for every version of the response. We ended the call. I sat at my desk and looked at the folder I was building for Saturday. It was no longer a manila folder. It was a tabbed binder, organized chronologically, with a cover page that listed the 3 legal tracks and the relevant filing reference numbers. Professional, readable, the kind of document that communicated competence before a single page was turned. I had 4 copies made, one for me, one for my father, one for Gloria, and one for Theodora, who would not be physically present, but whose name and contact information were on the cover page. I put the binders in my bag, and I went home. In the 10 days between the coffee on Thurman Street and the Saturday meeting, I attended 2 family interactions that required me to be present as the version of myself they expected. The first was a brief phone call from my mother on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of call she made when she wanted to confirm something without appearing to confirm it. She asked if I was planning to drive to Beaverton on Saturday, or if I wanted her to arrange for someone to pick me up. The offer of a pickup was new. In 23 years of family gatherings, she had never offered to arrange my transportation. She was worried I would not come. I'll drive myself, I said. I'll be there at 10. 10 is perfect, she said, with a warmth that had the particular quality of relief. Gloria will be there at 10:30. We'll have coffee before. That sounds nice, I said. She paused. Just for a moment, a fractional pause, the kind that only registers if you have spent years calibrating to the specific rhythms of a person's speech. Then, I'm glad you're being so. I'm just glad you're coming, Vivian. Of course, I said. I let my shoulders drop slightly after I hung up. Not because I had given up, because I needed them comfortable. The second interaction was an email from Renata, sent Thursday evening, with the subject line Saturday, a few things. The email said she wanted to make sure I understood that the meeting was being held in the spirit of transparency and family unity, and that she hoped we could all approach the conversation without defensiveness. She used the word together 4 times in 6 sentences. I reviewed the email at my kitchen counter and thought about the 14% property interest she had received by quitclaim deed in August of 2022. The deed with the voidable description error. The deed that my father had prepared without his own attorney's knowledge. The deed that was now sitting in Soren Vittle's title analysis as Exhibit A in a property challenge. I replied, looking forward to it. You Saturday. I kept my handwriting, metaphorically speaking, completely even. The close call that came nearest to surfacing something happened on Friday afternoon, less than 24 hours before the meeting. I was in my office finalizing the binders when Garrett called, and something in the way he opened the conversation, too casual, slightly rushed, told me he was calling with a purpose. Hey, so, random question, he said. Have you talked to anyone about the estate stuff? Like, professionally. I looked at the binder on my desk. The 4 organized copies, tabbed and indexed. I looked at the cover page with Theodora Nakamura's name and contact information at the bottom right corner. What do you mean? I asked. Someone mentioned they thought they had seen you going into a law office on Morrison. I wasn't sure if you had, consulted with someone about the distribution. Someone had seen me, or they had asked someone to watch. Either was possible. I cataloged both possibilities without reacting to either. I'm a lawyer, Garrett, I said. I go into law offices fairly regularly, a beat. Right? No, yeah, obviously. I just meant specifically about the estate. I talk to attorneys about estate matters all the time, I said. It's my practice area. He made a sound that was trying to be a laugh. It did not entirely succeed. Right, of course. So everything's fine. Everything is fine, I said. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and called Theodora immediately. They may have had someone watching my building, I said. How specific was the inquiry? He mentioned Morrison Street, seeing me going into a law office. That could be general observation rather than targeted surveillance. Yes, I said, but I want you to know the possibility exists. Does it change Saturday? I thought about it. If they had been watching my building, they knew I had visited law offices on Morrison Street. They did not know which ones, or for what purpose. They did not know about Soren, whose office was on Southwest 5th, not Morrison. They did not know about the property records request. They did not know about the audit filing. No, I said, it doesn't change Saturday. Then rest tonight, Theodora said. You've done the preparation. Tomorrow is just delivery. I put the binders in my bag before I left the office that evening. I drove home through the city, and I thought, for the first time in several weeks, about something entirely outside the scope of what I had been building. I thought about a colleague of mine named Adiz Obi. She worked in a different practice area entirely, employment law, and we had been having lunch together every 6 weeks or so for the better part of 3 years. She was funny in the specific way that people who have seen a great deal of human behavior tend to be funny, observational, exact, never mean. She had known, in a general way, that I was managing a complicated family situation, and she had never pressed for details, which I had valued more than I had ever told her. I called her from my car. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me something that has nothing to do with law," I said. She laughed, the genuine kind. "My upstairs neighbor has started practicing the cello." "How is it?" "Medically inadvisable," she said. "You okay?" "I'm fine. I have something significant tomorrow, and I wanted to hear a normal voice." "Significant like professionally significant or personally significant?" "Both," I said, overlapping. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know what you're doing?" "Yes," I said. "Then you're going to be fine," she said. "Call me Sunday and tell me how it went." I drove the rest of the way home without the radio on. I thought about what Adiz had said, not the encouragement, but the question. Do you know what you're doing? I had been asked variations of that question for 23 years, mostly as a challenge, mostly with the implication that I did not. My mother asking it when I left for law school. My father asking it when I left the firm to start my own practice. My brother asking it, implicitly, every time he had described me as the solid one, the capable one, as though competence were a consolation prize for not being loved the way the others were. I knew what I was doing. I had known for 3 years what I was building and why. The why had started with the collections notice, and the co-signed mortgage and the earrings substituted for an inheritance. But it had grown into something more precise than injury. It had become a principle. The principle was that the story of my family was not going to be written by the people who had the least interest in its accuracy. I was the estate attorney. I was the one who knew how documents worked and what records contained and how institutional processes moved. I was the sharpest person in the room, and the room had spent 23 years not noticing. Saturday was 11 hours away. I put the bag with the binders beside the front door where I would not forget it. I made dinner. I went to bed at a reasonable hour, and I slept, which surprised me and then did not surprise me. I had done the work. The rest was just showing up. The Saturday meeting was at 10 in the morning at the house in Beaverton. My mother had made the dark roast coffee she always made when she wanted things to feel considered. The good cups were out, not the everyday mugs, but the matching ceramic set she reserved for occasions she wanted to signal as significant. Renata arrived before me. She was in the kitchen when I came in, and she looked up with the warm, practiced expression she used for family events. Felipe was not with her, which I noted. She had not brought her husband to a meeting about the estate distribution. My father was in the living room. He stood when I came in, which he did not always do, and he crossed the room and shook my hand, not a hug, a handshake, with the particular formality of someone who has been coached or has coached himself for a specific interaction. "Vivian," he said, "glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. Garrett arrived 12 minutes late, without Priya, and with the expression of someone who had not slept particularly well. He poured himself coffee and stood near the kitchen doorway rather than sitting, which was Garrett's way of reserving the option to be peripheral. Gloria Fenn arrived at 10:32, 2 minutes late, her briefcase and a professional composure that I recognized as the calibrated neutral of someone who knows more than they are showing. She shook hands with my father, acknowledged my mother, and then made eye contact with me for just a fraction longer than the situation required. I gave her the smallest nod I could produce. My father arranged us in the living room. He sat in his chair. My mother took the love seat beside him. Renata sat in the armchair across from the fireplace. Garrett remained standing near the window. I took the chair closest to the door, with my bag on the floor beside me, and I set the binder I was going to use face down on my lap. Gloria took a seat to my father's left and opened her briefcase on the coffee table with the methodical efficiency she always brought to document reviews. My father cleared his throat. "I want to start by saying that this is a family conversation," he said. "We've brought Gloria in because she knows the estate documents better than any of us, and we want this to be transparent." Transparent. I kept my face still. "The estate, as you all know, is in a good position," he continued. "The business sale completed in February. The property is in good shape. Gloria has the distribution calculations." Gloria opened the trust document to the relevant section. She turned it to face the room. "The trust, as currently structured," she said, "distributes the liquid estate assets to 3 beneficiaries. The distribution percentages are, before we get to percentages," my father said, "I want to address the attribution question." Gloria stopped. She looked at my father. "There are family expenses over the past several years," he said, "that were carried informally across different accounts. Events, obligations, things that the family collectively benefited from. For the purpose of the distribution, some of those costs are being attributed against the relevant beneficiary shares." He was looking at me when he said the last sentence. Not exclusively at me, but the gravitational pull of his attention had oriented itself toward my chair. Renata had folded her hands in her lap. Her bracelet, the silver and enamel one, caught the light when she shifted. "The attributed amount," my father said, "against Vivian's share specifically. Gloria has the figure." Gloria looked down at her documents. Then she looked up at my father, and the expression on her face was the one I had been waiting for, the expression of an estate attorney who has just been asked to read a figure into the record that she knows is not supported by the documented estate revision history. She looked at me. I was looking at her. She looked back at my father. The attribution figure, as provided to me, was $47,200, she said. Her voice was entirely even. "Attributed as family event costs." "Right," my father said. "That reduces Vivian's share accordingly, which brings us to the 8% figure in the trust document." He looked at me. The room looked at me. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. I let my shoulders drop slightly, not in defeat, but in the practiced physical language of someone absorbing unwelcome information. I had rehearsed this. Not the words, the body that said, "I did not expect this. This is difficult. I am going to take a moment." "I see," I said. "Can I ask, what accounts did those charges come from, the event costs?" My father's expression stayed settled, but something in it adjusted. A small recalibration. "Various accounts." vendor accounts that were set up for the events. Set up in whose name? I asked. My voice was quiet, professionally curious, not confrontational. My mother's posture straightened in the love seat. That was how I knew she was frightened. In the family's accounts, my father said. The phrasing was deliberate and vague. I nodded slowly. I reached into my bag and I took out one of the binders. I set it on my knee, face up now, but I did not open it yet. I let them see it. I let them see that it was organized and tabbed and professional. My father's eyes went to the binder, then to my face. He pulled at his collar. Once, then again. I want to make sure I understand the structure, I said, before we finalize anything. Would it be all right if I went through a few things? Renata looked at the binder. She looked at my father. The skin around her eyes tightened in the particular way it did when she was managing an expression she did not want anyone to see. Of course, my father said. His voice was still steady. He was a man who had spent 30 years in commercial insurance, and he knew how to sound steady. I opened the binder. The attributed expenses, totaling $47,200, I said. I have documentation showing that those charges were opened on accounts in my name. My social security number, without my knowledge or consent. The room changed. Not loudly. There was no dramatic sound, no chair scraping back, no voice raised. What changed was the quality of the silence. It became a different kind of silence, the kind that has weight. My father looked at his estate attorney before he looked at me. Gloria Fenn's hands were folded on her documents. She did not move. Vivian, my father said. His voice had lost the settled quality. Those were family accounts. They were accounts opened in my name using my social security number, I said. The original account documentation is in this binder. The collections notices, the creditor correspondence, and an identity verification trace showing the social security number and date of birth used to open each account. I turned to the tab. 4 accounts. March 2021 through February 2022. All attached to events organized by this household. My mother's hand went to her throat. She always did that when a secret was close to the surface. I said, keeping my voice at the same professional register, have filed a civil complaint with the assistance of my attorney, Theodora Nakamura, alleging identity theft and fraud. The complaint reference number is on the cover page. The Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services audit was filed 2 weeks ago. I turned to the cover tab and set the page facing outward so my father could see the reference number. The audit is on record. Any distribution made in the context of an active audit becomes part of that record. My father was looking at the binder. He was not looking at me. He looked at Gloria. Gloria looked at the documents in front of her. Then, carefully and without expression, she said, "The attribution figure, as provided, was tied to accounts that were opened in your name without your authorization." "Yes," I said. "Then the attribution cannot be used to justify the distribution reduction," she said. She was speaking to the room, but she was speaking as the drafting attorney making a legal determination about her own document. Fraudulent expense attribution applied against a beneficiary's share is not a valid trust instrument adjustment. It would need to be removed from the calculation. Renata looked at our mother. Our mother was very still. There's also a second matter, I said. I turned to the next tab. A quitclaim deed recorded August 17th of 2022, conveying a 14% undivided interest in this property to Renata. No consideration, no disclosure to the mortgage lender, and no cosigner consent, which is required under paragraph 4 of page 7 of the 2019 refinance agreement. I set the relevant pages facing outward. I am the cosigner. My consent was not obtained. Renata's hand moved to her bracelet. She was very still. She was not going to look at me. The deed, I continued, also contains a description error in the legal property description. The lot dimensions cited do not match the current county plat. Under Oregon recording statutes, the deed is voidable on that basis, independently. My title attorney, Soren Vittel, has the analysis. My father tried to say something. The sound that came out was not a word. I set the binder on the coffee table, facing him. I folded my hands. I have 3 tabbed sections, I said. The civil complaint and audit documentation, the identity theft trace and account records, the deed challenge and title analysis. Gloria has the trust documents, and she now has the context that the attributed expenses cannot support the distribution reduction. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then my father, and I want to be precise about this, because I had spent 3 years imagining versions of this moment, and the reality was quieter than any of them. My father looked down at the binder on the coffee table, and then looked up at me, and the expression on his face was not anger or defiance. It was the expression of a man who has opened a contract and found that the other party's name was already on the other side. He had looked up from the documents, expecting to find the daughter who co-signed without asking questions. He found the attorney who had been building the case for 3 years. "What is it you want?" he said. His voice was lower than I had ever heard it. I looked at him steadily. "I want you to sign the audit acknowledgement," I said. "A formal written statement that the attributed expenses are fraudulent and that they were charged to accounts opened in my name without my authorization. Signed by you. Witnessed by Gloria." Garrett made a sound from near the window. I did not look at him. "If you sign the acknowledgement," I said, "we proceed with the corrected distribution, my full 1/3 share, the fraudulent attribution removed, the deed transfer addressed through Soren's title process. Theodora's civil complaint remains on file, and we discuss restitution terms separately. But the family meeting proceeds on corrected terms. And if I don't," my father said. "If you don't," I said, "the civil complaint proceeds to the courts. The audit produces findings. The deed challenge goes through title litigation. Gloria will be called as a witness regarding the trust revision timeline and the attributed expense documentation she was provided." I looked at Gloria. "That's accurate, isn't it?" Gloria Fenn looked at my father. "If the fraud complaint proceeds, and I am called as a witness," she said carefully, "I would be required to provide complete testimony regarding all documents I prepared and all information I was provided in connection with this estate." My father looked at the binder for a long time. My mother had not spoken since her posture had straightened. Renata was looking at the fireplace. Garrett, near the window, had his arms crossed across his chest and was looking at the floor. I waited. Outside, the neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods do on Saturday mornings in March. A dog barking twice and stopping. A car going past. The ordinary texture of a world that was proceeding without any awareness of what was happening in this living room. My father reached forward and pulled the binder toward him. He opened the cover page. He looked at the audit reference number. He looked at the civil complaint header with Theodora Nakamura's name at the bottom. He looked at his estate attorney. Gloria looked back at him without expression. He pulled at his collar, once, then again. Then he looked at me across the coffee table, the same table where we had eaten holiday dinners for 3 decades, where he had sat in his chair, and told the family what things were worth and who was contributing and what the family needed, and he said quietly, "Show me where to sign." I opened the binder to the acknowledgement page. I slid it across the table. I set a pen beside it. He picked up the pen. His handwriting, when he signed, was smaller than usual, compressed. The handwriting of a man who is doing something he cannot undo and knows it. Gloria signed as witness. Her signature was exactly the size it always was. I let my shoulders drop for the second time that morning. The first time had been performance. This time was not. I picked up the signed acknowledgement and placed it back in the binder. I looked at my father, and then at my mother, and then at Renata, and then at Garrett, and I thought about everything I could have said. I thought about the earrings. I thought about 23 years of Sunday dinners and co-signed mortgages and collections notices, and the particular silence of being the one they did not worry about. I did not say any of it. "Gloria," I said, "can you prepare the corrected distribution calculations using the full 1/3 share?" "I'll have them to you by Thursday," she said. "Thank you." I stood up and picked up my bag. "I'll see myself out." I walked through the living room and through the front hallway and out the front door of the house I had been co-signed on for 4 years, and I stood on the front porch in the March air for a moment, and I looked at the neighborhood doing its ordinary Saturday things, and I thought, they thought it was finished. In 72 hours, they would learn it had just begun. The 72 hours after the Beaverton meeting were quieter than I had expected. I had anticipated calls. I had anticipated the specific kind of family phone call that follows a confrontation, urgent, slightly breathless, trying to reframe what had just occurred into something more manageable. My mother calling to say that she hoped we could all find a way through this. Garrett calling to ask what happened next. Renata calling, or not calling, which would be its own kind of statement. What I got was silence. For 48 hours, nothing. I went to work on Monday morning. I reviewed the case files I had set aside during the final preparation for the meeting. I had lunch with a client in the Pearl District who was working through a difficult trust revision for her own family's estate, and I listened carefully and gave her the best advice I had, and I thought about what it meant to be someone who helped other families navigate the exact architecture of the thing that had been used against me. Theodora called Monday afternoon. Gloria Fenn submitted a formal notation to the trust instrument on Friday afternoon, she said. She added a professional memorandum documenting the basis on which the attribution figure was determined to be invalid. She did it the same day. Within 4 hours of the meeting, Theodora said, she is protecting herself professionally. She knows what exposure she was handed. That's her right, I said, and it's useful to us. It is. The memorandum establishes that the drafting attorney repudiated the attribution in real time. That is very difficult to walk back in a civil proceeding. When does the corrected distribution calculation come from, Gloria? She said Thursday. I expected Thursday. I put the phone down and looked out the window at the city. Monday afternoon in Portland in March, gray, particular, the kind of light that has no strong opinion about itself. I thought about my father's handwriting on the acknowledgement page, the way it had been smaller than usual, compressed. The restitution conversation, which I had told the family we would address separately, was the remaining open track. Theodora had a demand letter prepared. The figures were precise: $47,200 in fraudulent charges, plus 3 years of interest at the statutory rate, plus documented costs associated with the audit filing, and my legal fees through the date of the acknowledgement signing. The total was $61,840. I had not yet decided when to send it. I was waiting for something. Not tactically. I had said I was done waiting, and I meant it. But I wanted to let the acknowledgement signature settle into the record before the demand letter arrived. I wanted my father to have 72 hours of understanding what he had signed before he received the document that told him what it was going to cost him. That was not strategy. That was something else. I am not sure I have an exact word for it. On Tuesday evening, Garrett called. He didn't open with a question. He said, I didn't know. His voice was the specific flatness of someone who has rehearsed an opening line many times and is now delivering it and not sure how it's landing. I was at my kitchen counter. I had a glass of water and a case file open in front of me, and I had not eaten dinner yet. Didn't know which part, I said, a pause. The accounts. The Social Security number. He stopped. I knew the trust had been revised. Dad told me and Renata 2 years ago that there had been a restructuring. He said it was because of family expenses. I assumed it was legitimate. You assumed it was legitimate, I said. Yes. I thought about Thanksgiving. About Garrett calling me the morning after the sale closed to tell me about the price in his too casual voice. About the coffee on Thurman Street, where he had told me it wouldn't be a whole thing. Garrett, I said, knew the distribution had been restructured to give me 8%. Yes, and you came to have coffee with me to make sure I was going to come to the meeting without making trouble. A silence that was different from the ones I had experienced in my professional life. This one had a texture to it, the texture of a 39-year-old man understanding something about himself that he had been successfully avoiding. I didn't know about the fraud, he said again. Quieter this time. I know, I said. And this was the truth. I had looked at the account documentation carefully. The accounts were in my mother's organizational domain. The events were hers. The logistics were hers. Garrett had benefited from a restructuring he had not questioned and had helped contain. but he had not built the mechanism. He was an enabler rather than an architect, and there was a difference, even if the difference did not entirely absolve him. "What happens now?" he said. "A corrected distribution is being calculated," I said. "My full third share. The attributed expenses removed. The deed transfer will be addressed through the title process with Soren Vittel. There will be a restitution demand for the fraudulent charges. Does that go through the courts? That depends on whether the response to the demand letter is cooperative." Another silence. Then, "Priya thinks I should have said something sooner." I looked at my kitchen window. "Priya sounds like someone worth listening to." He made a sound, something between a short laugh and something else. "Yeah." I did not tell him I had noted her expression at Thanksgiving dinner and had made sure she was not in the room on Saturday. Some things do not need to be said. "I'll let you know how the Thursday calculation looks," I said. We hung up. I made dinner. I thought about Adiz and the call from Friday, and I thought about what it meant that the first person who had made me feel like myself in the week before the meeting had been entirely outside the situation. I called her. "Tell me," she said when she answered. I told her. Not everything, not the binder tabs and the statutory interest rate and Gloria Fenn's professional memorandum, but the shape of it, the room, my father's handwriting on the acknowledgement page. "He signed," she said. "He signed." A brief pause. "How are you?" I thought about it. I thought about the question as a real question rather than a social formality. "I'm tired," I said, "in the way you get tired after something that needed a lot of holding." "The good kind of tired." "I think so," I said. "I'll know more in a few weeks." "You need dinner and something that isn't about work," she said. "Saturday. I'm making my mother's jollof rice, and you're coming over." "Yes," I said, without having to think about it. It was the easiest answer I had given all week. Gloria Fenn's corrected distribution calculation arrived Thursday morning, as promised. I reviewed it at my desk before 9 o'clock. The corrected figures reflected a 1/3 share of the liquid estate. 1/3 of the distributable proceeds from the business sale, after fees and applicable taxes, came to $461,330. The property would be addressed separately through the title process once the deed challenge was resolved. But $461,000 was the number, clean, documented, supported by the estate instrument and the professional memorandum that now formed part of the trust record. I looked at that number for a moment. I thought about 8%. The 8% they had written into the trust revision in July of 2021, concurrent with the fraudulent credit accounts, at a time when they had clearly decided that what they were doing was worth doing. The difference between 8% and 1/3 of the liquid estate was approximately $277,000. I forwarded the calculation to Theodora. Her response came within the hour. "Demand letter goes out today." The demand letter went to my parents' home address and to their personal attorney, a man I had not previously interacted with, named Boyd Carrera, who practiced general civil law in Beaverton, and who had apparently been retained sometime in the previous week, because his name appeared on a brief, formal acknowledgement receipt that arrived in response to the audit filing. Boyd Carrera. I had not met him. I looked up his practice profile out of professional habit. 15 years in practice, general civil, primarily contracts and residential transactions. He had, as far as I could determine, no litigation experience in fraud or estate matters. They had hired the wrong attorney for the situation they were in. This happened more often than people understood, in my experience. Families in crisis retained whoever was accessible rather than whoever was appropriate, and then spent the following months learning the difference. I made a note. I forwarded his contact information to Theodora and let her manage the demand letter correspondence. Then I turned to the next thing, which was the family event I had not anticipated. My cousin Felicity Mwangi called me on a Thursday in April, 3.5 weeks after the Beaverton meeting. Felicity was my father's niece by his older sister, a woman named Claudette, who had died 6 years earlier. And she was one of the people in my extended family whom I had always liked without having strong cause to spend significant time with. The kind of relative who occupies a warmly peripheral position in the family, present at major occasions, reliable, without the dynamics that made the central family relationships complicated. Felicity was 44, worked as a registered nurse in Vancouver, Washington, and had the directness that people who work in clinical settings often develop. She did not circle things. I heard about what happened at Uncle Leonard's, she said. How did you hear? Renata called my mother before she died. I mean, not recently. My mother had told me some things, and then Renata called me last week. I waited. I want you to know, Felicity said, that my mother knew about the grandmother's will, the original one. She was there when Grandma Eunice told your father what she intended, equal shares. She was specific about it. A pause. My mother wrote it down. She kept a lot of notes. When she died, her files came to me. I set down the pen I had been holding. Felicity, I said carefully, your mother wrote down a contemporaneous account of Eunice Cross's stated intentions for the estate in a notebook with a date, and your grandmother signed the page. I think she must have known there would be trouble later. My grandmother had known there would be trouble. My grandmother had known well enough to find a witness and have that witness document the conversation. She had been right to know it. I have the notebook, Felicity said. I wasn't sure what to do with it, but after what Renata told me happened at the house, I think you should have it. I thought about the earrings, the card in my mother's handwriting, the conversation with my grandmother 3 months before she died, when she had used the word equally, with the particular emphasis of someone who needed it on the record. She had put it on the record. She had just put it in a place they had not thought to look. Can I come to Vancouver? I asked. I'll be home Saturday morning, Felicity said. I drove to Vancouver on Saturday. Felicity lived in a house near the waterfront that had the practical, organized quality of someone who had thought carefully about how they wanted to live. She made coffee, and we sat at her kitchen table, and she put the notebook in front of me. It was a composition notebook, the kind with the black and white marbled covers, and it was filled with her mother Claudette's handwriting, dated entries, the record of a woman who had kept careful account of things because she understood that careful accounts mattered. The entry I needed was dated September of the year my grandmother had died. 3 months before she passed, just as I had estimated. It read, in Claudette's clear, slightly formal hand, that Eunice Cross had stated her intention to divide her estate equally among her 3 grandchildren, Vivian, Renata, and Garrett, without exception, and that this was her firm and settled wish. The entry noted the specific amounts she expected to be available for distribution. It noted that she was concerned her son Leonard and his wife Diane would not respect her wishes. And at the bottom of the entry, in a different handwriting, shakier, the writing of a woman in her late 70s, was a signature, Eunice Marguerite Cross, and a date. I looked at that signature for a long time. She knew, I said. She knew, Felicity said. My mother told me after Grandma died that she had tried to talk to Uncle Leonard. He told her the estate had been handled appropriately. My mother decided not to push it. She always said she felt she hadn't done enough. Felicity looked at her coffee cup. She kept the notebook because she knew someday it would matter. It matters now, I said. The notebook documented that the original estate distribution, the one that had given me earrings instead of an equal share, had been a knowing deviation from my grandmother's stated and witnessed intention. It was not, on its own, a legal instrument that would unwind a distribution from 20 years earlier. But it was documentation. It was a contemporaneous witness account with a signed corroboration. And it was evidence that the pattern of financial redirection in my family had not begun with the credit accounts in 2021. It had begun at least 2 decades earlier. I borrowed the notebook long enough to have it professionally photographed and digitized. I returned the original to Felicity with a written receipt. Then I drove back to Portland, put the digital file in the encrypted folder that now contained 132 pages of documented family financial history, and I made a note that Eunice Marguerite Cross had, in the fall of the year she died, tried to make sure her granddaughter would not be cheated. She had not entirely succeeded, but she had tried, and the trying was now in the record. I added a note to the file. Then I called Theodora. There's a new document, I said. It doesn't affect the current proceedings directly, but I want it in the record. Send it. I sent it. Then I sat at my desk in the particular quiet of a Saturday afternoon, and I thought about my grandmother, who had known her son well enough to find a witness, and I thought about the 23 years between that September notebook entry and the October collections notice, and I thought about what it meant that I had spent those years building exactly the expertise needed to do what she had not quite been able to do herself. The pattern had started before me. The resolution had started with me. That felt on a Saturday afternoon, with the case file closed on my desk, like something worth acknowledging, not with celebration, but with recognition. The kind that settles quietly rather than announcing itself. The response to Theodora's demand letter came from Boyd Carrera 11 days after it was sent. It was 3 pages, and it denied, in carefully worded but legally unsophisticated language, that the charges represented identity theft as defined by the relevant statutes, and it characterized the account openings as a family financial arrangement that my mother had understood to have my general authorization based on prior financial cooperation. Prior financial cooperation. The co-signed mortgage, in other words, was being offered as evidence that I had consented to subsequent financial use of my credentials. This was not a sustainable legal position. Theodora's response, which went out within 48 hours, said so in 11 pages with statutory citations. Boyd Carrera's counter-response took 8 more days and was considerably shorter. It indicated that his client was willing to discuss a negotiated resolution. Willing to discuss. 3 weeks after my father had signed the acknowledgement, and they were willing to discuss. "What are our terms?" Theodora asked on a call. "Full restitution," I said. $61,840. No reductions, no payment plan exceeding 6 months. The civil complaint stays on file until the final payment clears. They'll push back on the timeline. They can push back, I said. The offer is 60 days for full payment or 6 monthly installments. After 6 months, the complaint proceeds. Theodora sent the terms. The counter came back requesting 12 months. 6, I said. Final, she sent it. They accepted in 48 hours. The first restitution payment arrived in Theodora's client trust account 31 days later, on a Monday morning in May. She sent me a confirmation email with the transaction reference and no additional commentary, which was the appropriate response. I noted the date in my file and moved on to the afternoon's client work. The deed challenge, which Soren Vittel was managing through the title process, took longer. The voidable legal description was the cleaner ground, and Soren pursued it first. Renata's attorney. She had retained someone separate from Boyd Carrera, a younger real property attorney named Desmond Park, whose work I had seen before, and who was competent enough to understand the exposure quickly, negotiated a deed rescission within 60 days. The 14% interest transferred back to the estate. The estate asset recalculation that followed adjusted the total distributable value and produced a revised 1/3 share that was marginally larger than Gloria's initial corrected calculation. Renata did not call me during this period. I did not call her. Garrett checked in twice by text brief messages that were clearly written by someone trying to be present, without knowing what presence required in the situation. I answered both. I was not warm, and I was not cold. I was accurate. My mother called once, 6 weeks after the meeting, on a Tuesday evening when I was making dinner. I looked at the phone for 2 rings. Then I answered. She talked for 4 minutes about nothing significant, the weather, a neighbor's renovation project, whether I had been to a particular restaurant in Northwest Portland that she had heard was good. She did not mention the meeting. She did not mention the audit or the acknowledgement or the deed transfer or the restitution demand. I listened. I answered the questions she asked. After 4 minutes, she said she should let me get back to my evening, and I said good night, and we hung up. I stood at my stove and stirred what I was cooking, and I thought about what that call had been. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, but a contact, a reaching out, a testing of whether the line was still there. I had picked up. That was all I could say about it. I had picked up, and we had talked about a restaurant, and I had said good night. That was the transaction. Whether it was enough, or the beginning of something, or simply one data point in a very long accounting that would never fully close, I did not yet know. I thought about my grandmother's signature in Claudette's notebook. I thought about my father's signature on the acknowledgement page, smaller than usual, compressed. I thought about the particular silence after I had set the binder on the coffee table and said, "I've reviewed everything. Let's talk about what happens next." I plated my dinner. I sat at my kitchen table. I ate. The corrected distribution from the trust closed in June. $461,330 from the liquid estate transferred to my account on a Thursday morning, plus the revised share from the property recalculation after the deed rescission, an additional $42,000, bringing the total estate distribution to $503,000. $500,000, 1/3 of what had always been mine. I did not do anything dramatic when the transfer confirmed. I had a client call at 9 and I took it. I had a document review at 11 and I completed it. At 12:30, I walked to a place on Morrison Street that made good sandwiches, and I sat at a window table and I ate lunch alone, which is something I have always been comfortable doing. And I watched the street outside, and I thought about nothing in particular for 22 minutes. That was the right way to receive it. Quietly, in ordinary time, without performance. The restitution payments continued on schedule. The 4th and 5th payments arrived in September and October. The 6th and final payment cleared on a Monday morning in November, 26 months after the collections notice had arrived in its manila envelope with the red stripe across the top. Theodora filed the civil complaint closure that same week. The audit with the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services was resolved in my favor 3 months earlier, with a formal finding that the accounts had been opened using my identifying information without authorization. The finding was on the public record. It would remain there. I added the closure documents to the file. The file was now 158 pages. I backed it up to 3 separate locations, the way I always backed up files that might matter later, and then I put it in the archive section of my system and did not open it again. There was one more thing that needed to happen, and it happened in December. I had planned to be at a small gathering, a client holiday event that I had committed to months earlier, at a restored event space in the Pearl District. It was not a family event. It was a professional one. 43 people in a room I had rented using my own business credit, my own name, my own account. My father called that afternoon. Not the morning of, not a text, a call, on a December afternoon, while I was getting ready. I answered. he said my name. Just my name, and then a silence. Vivian, he said again. Yes, I said. I want to, he stopped. A long pause, the kind that has a specific weight. The weight of someone in their late 60s confronting something they cannot construct into an acceptable shape. I want you to know that I understand that what was done was wrong. I waited. What your mother did with the accounts, the trust revision, I should not have allowed it. I noticed two things. The first was that he had used the passive construction for my mother's actions and the conditional construction for his own. The second was that he had not said the word sorry. I was not going to say it for him. I know you understand it, I said. You signed the acknowledgement. I know, a pause. I'm calling because I wanted to say it, not because an attorney told me to. I thought about the earrings. I thought about the co-signed mortgage. I thought about 23 years of Sunday dinners and holiday calls, and the particular quality of being the one nobody worried about, the one who would absorb it, the one who never made trouble. I thought about my grandmother's signature in a notebook that was now photographed, digitized, and archived. I hear you, I said. It was the truest thing I could say. It did not mean I was finished with what had happened. It did not mean I was beginning something new. It meant I had heard him, and the information had been received, and what happened next would be determined by what followed this call. Merry Christmas, he said. It was December 14th. Merry Christmas, I said. We hung up. I finished getting ready. I went to the event. It is now 18 months since the Beaverton meeting. My practice has continued to grow. I added a second attorney to the firm in September, a woman named Camille Ose, who came from a large estate firm downtown, and who has the particular quality of someone who understands that estate work is not about documents. It is about families and what they do to each other across time. She is good at it. She will be excellent. I closed 2 significant estate matters in the past quarter, including one that referred by a client who had found my firm through Gloria Fenn. Gloria and I have developed a working relationship that is professional and slightly careful on both sides, which is the appropriate relationship for 2 attorneys who have been in the same room for the same consequential conversation. We refer clients to each other when it makes sense. We do not discuss my family. I had dinner with Felicity Mwangi last month in Vancouver. She made food her mother used to make, and we talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with notebooks or estate documents or family meetings. She told me about a patient who had made her laugh until she cried. I told her about a case that had made me feel, unexpectedly, like the work I did was exactly the work I was supposed to be doing. I see Adiz Obi every 6 weeks, approximately, for lunch. The cello-playing neighbor moved out in July. She is growing herbs on her windowsill, with mixed results. I gave her a cutting of my rosemary plant, which seems to be doing better than the basil. My mother and I speak occasionally. The calls are short and specific, and we do not discuss what happened. I do not know if this is progress or simply the shape that the relationship will hold from now on. I am living inside the uncertainty of that without needing to resolve it immediately. That, in itself, feels like something I have learned. Renata and I have not spoken since December of the year before the meeting, when she sent the email about Saturday. I do not know what her version of the story is. I know what the documents say. Garrett is still with Priya. They moved in together in the spring. He seems, from the occasional text, to be doing better than he has in years. I have not asked about the grocery delivery app. He has not mentioned it. I take this as a sign that something is finally settling in him. The way things sometimes settle when the pretense holding a family shape has been removed, and people have to find out what they actually want to build. I think about my grandmother sometimes. I think about her writing down what she wanted and finding a witness and signing the page. And I think about the fact that she could not make it matter in her lifetime, but she made it matter in mine. That is a kind of foresight I find worth honoring. And if there is anything this taught me, it is this. 1. Patience without documentation is just silence. The only silence that becomes power is the silence during which you are building something, recording something, establishing something that the other party has no idea is being assembled. 2. In family disputes, the paper always outlasts the relationship. The deed, the trust, the account record, the signed acknowledgement. These do not soften with time or family loyalty. And having them means having the conversation on ground that cannot be moved. 3. Your family's version of who you are is not a fact. It is a story they have agreed to tell because it is convenient for them. And the day you stop accepting it as your own, you become capable of building an identity that no one can revise without your consent. Was I wrong to wait 3 years, to sit at their tables, answer their calls, attend their events, and say nothing while the case file grew to 158 pages? To let them commit, over and over, to a position they could not walk back. There are people who will say, I should have spoken the moment I found the first collections notice. There are people who will say what I did was calculated beyond what any family relationship deserves. I have thought about both positions. I have not resolved them. I am not sure resolution is what they require. Tell me in the comments. Comment, vengeance served. If you have ever been the one your family decided could be borrowed against, because they were certain you would not push back. If this story gave you something, share it with someone today who is sitting at a table, keeping quiet, and building something no one knows about yet.